welcome to another Insider Notebook. James Palmer here with you on Bleacher Report. Remember, every Tuesday, 2 Eastern, we have this thing going for a half hour, breaking down a bunch of different topics, but also you can always jump in the chat. In between each and every topic, I always look over here, answer as many questions as I can. It's the fun part of interacting with all of you. I love the questions. Some of them are well, there's a variety of questions. Let's just put it that way. And I always love seeing all of them. We're going to go through the the Pro Football Hall of Fame voting, as we saw Robert Kraft, the owner of the New England Patriots, also not getting in. And we know that Bill Belichick was the main story last week when he was not getting in and will not get in as a first ballot Hall of Famer, even with his 6 Super Bowl titles as a head coach and 2 more as a defensive coordinator. I'll get to what maybe might be changing within the Hall of Fame. We'll get to Drake Maye's injury update on that throwing shoulder. The Giants have hired an offensive coordinator. It's Matt Nagy. I'll tell you why Nagy and what to expect with him and Jackson Dart. What's happening in Denver has been very interesting with their coaching staff. They go to an AFC title game, and there is just a lot of change going on there, and I'll tell you what to keep an eye on, specifically in terms of play calling. And then the Vikings, they fired their general manager. It is a big deal because of how late it was in the cycle, that a lot of people thought that Kwesi Adofo-Mensah was sitting there and he was evaluating players at the Senior Bowl, and then he ends up getting let go. Why the timing was the way it was and who they could potentially be looking at is what we're going to get into there with the Vikings. And then the Pro Bowl. Do we have a problem here? We have a problem with the Pro Bowl? Should we make some changes? Should we just get rid of it? I'll tell you what some people around the league I've talked to actually think. All right, let's get into the Hall of Fame voting and what has transpired over the last couple of weeks. Obviously, there was a massive uproar when Bill Belichick, arguably in a lot of people's minds, the best head coach in the modern era of NFL football, did not get in. He was shocked. He was kind of beside himself. He is a man who's always loved everything about the Hall of Fame. I've had long conversations sitting in small rooms where he's at and listening to him talk about the history of the game. And I don't know if anybody speaks more eloquently about it and has a greater passion for the NFL and its history than Bill Belichick, but he did not get in. Remember that? That really led to the Hall putting out a statement, if you remember, and it said, the selection of a new class is the most important duty of the Hall of Fame. Oversees it each and every year, and the integrity of the process cannot be in question, that they might make some changes. Why did they come out with that statement? Because of the public backlash that went out there and transpired after Bill Belichick didn't get in. Well, now we found out today that Robert Kraft also did not get in, who has been trying to get in for a number of years, has been lobbying heavily, let's be honest, to try to get into the Hall of Fame, and rightfully so. He's been to, I believe, 11 Super Bowls. He could be potentially winning his 7th as an owner, has done amazing things in terms of broadcast rights and on that side of advancing the league, but he also doesn't get in. What changes could kind of come in the future? I would say this. The Hall of Fame always evaluates their entire process. There have been some changes in the past in terms of how voting's done and how it's broken down with the 50 Hall of Fame voters. But what might transpire this offseason as they go through their evaluation process like they do each and every time is maybe not penalizing voters, maybe not, you're not supposed to tell anybody, by the way, who you voted for. You're supposed to keep that all strictly confidential. It's like Fight Club. Do not talk about Fight Club. Do not talk about who you voted for. But obviously, there's some voters that have. Maybe that's a little bit more of the issue than who's getting in and who's not. But the thing that you want to keep an eye on is this specific category that both Robert Kraft and Bill Belichick are in. It's a category that is essentially comprised of seniors, which are guys that haven't played for 25 years or longer, coaches who are eligible to get in after 1 year after retirement, and contributors, who is Robert Kraft, which is people that are not players or coaches, and they can get in at any point and still be active in their role like Robert Kraft is as the acting owner of the New England Patriots. All 3 of these type of individuals are kind of in this hodgepodge motley crew group that is outside of the players that are voted for, right? 3 to 5 players roughly get in each and every year. This group, the seniors, coach, and contributors, is all kind of meshed together. And when I talk to people around the league, it's essentially this. The problem is that those are kind of very different individuals that you're pinning against each other. Should you be pinning Ken Anderson against Bill Belichick and Robert Kraft? And the voting process within that category seems to be kind of the part that's causing the biggest problem. And I think that's where the league might be, well, it's certainly not the league. The Pro Football Hall of Fame is its own thing. But that's where they could be looking at something and maybe a potential change, maybe changing that category or separating them or finding some other solution, because that's where voters are put in kind of a rough spot where there's players that are on their last chance to roughly get into the Hall of Fame, like again, more than 25 years removed from playing, and then you have coaches and then you have contributors and you're kind of pinning your vote against all of them. It's kind of bizarre in the manner in which that they're put in that same group. That's the biggest thing that I have heard that could be evaluated this upcoming offseason. To put this into perspective, I asked Copilot, by the way, how many head coaches were snubbed on their first ballot? And here's what we found. 29 coaches have been inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. 24 were first ballot snubs. The 5 that were first ballot Hall of Famers: George Halas, Curly Lambeau, Tom Landry, Chuck Noll, and Don Shula. Outstanding group, but I think you could say that Bill Belichick probably belongs in that group as well. Okay, so that's where things stand with the Hall of Fame. That's where everything is in terms of the voters. I do know that there's some people that think the voting should be kind of updated, and there's a little bit of a push in modern and not remembering certain aspects of the game that some people in that room, I think, are a little bit frustrated with, but we'll see what ends up transpiring. Okay, I see Tom Brady's name here, by the way. I do want to mention this. Because of the backlash that transpired, I would almost guarantee that the same thing for Tom Brady does not happen with Bill Belichick. Because remember, it was Spygate and Deflategate, and those are the reasons that some people didn't vote for Bill Belichick. Even though Tom Brady was the central figure of Deflategate, it was essentially him and in his whatever he decided to do with the footballs and the penalization and all that stuff and the destruction of evidence, all that things that some people put in against Bill Belichick. I would say that probably won't happen with Tom Brady after we saw everything that transpired there. Okay, let's get to Drake Maye and the shoulder. To put this in kind of context here, the week that happens at your facility before the teams arrive on Sunday at the Super Bowl location, usually the entire install happens there with almost every single team I've covered over a decade in the Super Bowl. And what ends up happening is you have your in-depth install. Some teams go to pads during that week. You have more, aggressive practices oftentimes. And Drake Maye was a limited participant and was actually, I believe, did not participate Friday due to an illness because of the injury to his throwing shoulder. Now, what we're going to keep our eye on, and nobody can watch practice, by the way, during Super Bowl week. There is one pool reporter per team that will observe practice and then speak to Mike Vrabel or speak to Mike McDonald and be able to glean on kind of way Drake Maye looked in practice. But there's going to be very limited ability for anybody, including the media, to get a chance to see him throwing a football. He did throw the football his normal amount on Monday in what that practice that they went through once they got to Santa Clara. I think it's a big deal that they didn't limit his throws on Monday at all. I think that's an important note. They went through their third down situations. They went through some other stuff that they would normally go through in that practice. And I think him throwing the allotted amount of balls was, I think, important and part of this. What my understanding is, keep an eye when you watch Sunday, not the deep ball, not does the arm strength have the ability to get the ball downfield. We know Drake Maye throws a brilliant deep ball. We know he has great touch on his deep ball. I was told keep an eye on maybe those short intermediate throws where he really has to zip the football in there, where he might have to get a ball to the sideline with a lot of extra strength, a lot of extra oomph to it. That might be where we'll be able to tell if the shoulder is 100%. The Patriots, my understanding, are very optimistic on where he stands with this shoulder. He thinks he's going to be almost virtually 100%. He has 2 whole weeks, but the fact that they're not limiting throws, I think, is a big part of it. I think that part plays a factor in all of this. So those are the things to keep an eye on with essentially Drake Maye. All right. I don't have a whole lot of. Let me see if I can go back here because I don't have a whole lot of chats. Are you guys not chatting with me, or am I just is my chat not updating? Let's see here. I want to just make sure she's back. Okay. Okay. Let's go to Matt Nagy, hired as the Giants offensive coordinator. We were all waiting for Todd Monken, obviously, to take this job. If he didn't get a head coaching job, he was going to reunite himself back with John Harbaugh. That was the expectation. But Todd Monken gets the head coaching job with the Cleveland Browns, which also surprised a lot of people and surprised some people in that building, I'll be honest. And he had his press conference actually today, his introductory press conference with the Browns. So that left the door open, and John Harbaugh goes to Matt Nagy. Now, Nagy, remember, was a finalist for the Titans head coaching job. He interviewed for the Raiders, Cardinals, and Ravens head coaching jobs. He was in the running possibly for that Eagles offensive coordinator job. My understanding was he was talked about and in the running for the Ohio State offensive coordinator job, but he ends up landing with the Giants. Now, there's some connections here, right? We know that he has coached under Andy Reid a ton. He coached in Philly. John Harbaugh coached with Andy Reid in Philadelphia. John Harbaugh and Reid talk pretty semi-regularly, I would say. They've talked recently, to my understanding. I would say Matt Nagy probably came up in those conversations. Andy Reid has been a big supporter of Nagy in terms of where he was going to go next. There was always the thought that he was going to depart because his contract was expiring, but a lot of people thought that's because he was going to get the head coaching job with the Tennessee Titans because Mike Borgonzi, his good buddy there from the Kansas City Chiefs, who was the assistant general manager to Brett Veach forever, gets the general manager job with the Titans. You thought the two of them would reunite there. They end up bringing up Eric Bieniemy back to Kansas City, and Matt Nagy's kind of making the circuit and lands with the Giants. Now, I think this part is the part that I'm keeping my eye on. I do think there is a very good chance that we're going to see some success with Matt Nagy and Jackson Dart. There's one part that stands out to me. First, there is the part the way Patrick Mahomes has always played the position. He has a great feel for the position. He's kind of a feel player in the way that he moves and operates as a quarterback. He's probably the best we've ever seen in terms of that regard. Jackson Dart plays in a very similar manner. So, Nagy does have that experience with playing a quarterback that kind of plays with that kind of feel in the pocket and the manner in which they operate the offense. Now, Patrick Mahomes was very good at communicating with the organization, and the organization, I was always told, was very open with letting Mahomes go and be himself, play freely, run the football, protect himself. They always thought he was very, very good at protecting himself when he decided to take chances and be creative and carry the football. Jackson Dart, in the short sample size, has not shown that ability. So what does Matt Nagy do in terms of coaching that balance, I think is going to be important. Another thing that was brought up to me, and I thought this was fascinating, is just talking to these people around the league asking, once the news broke, what do you think? What do you think about the fit? It was brought up to me, who's going to be his quarterback coach? And it was interesting because that came up with more than one person saying, it's important who this quarterback coach is. It's probably a more important hire than we're probably discussing. And that's why I wanted to mention it here, because that's what people around the league are talking about. Who is going to be that quarterback coach with Jackson Dart every moment attached at his hip to help the development alongside of what Nagy's implementing within that offense? They don't have one yet. I was told just about a half hour ago they weren't entirely certain or on who they were going to hire. They could be down the process with a couple of people, but it's not out there yet. That's something to specifically keep an eye on. But I do think some of the stuff that Matt Nagy also did with Alex Smith could fit a little bit in the way he operates with Jackson Dart. I think the passing game should be really, really good. We'll see what happens with the run game. Passing concept's definitely more of a strength of Matt Nagy. Okay, what else do we got on here? Well, that's interesting. Seems like Justin Jefferson wants out. I think Justin Jefferson wants a capable quarterback. I think that's part of things as well. Let's go on with what's happening in Denver. I think that's obviously a big part of what we're kind of looking at in the AFC landscape, because they get to the AFC title game, and obviously Bo Nix goes down and in the divisional round, doesn't play in that game. They have their backup in. A lot of people in that locker room that I've talked to truly believe that if Bo Nix played, they'd be in the Super Bowl right now. But they're not, and Sean Payton alluded to possibly some changes. They end up parting ways with Joe Lombardi, their offensive coordinator, their corners coach, their wide receiver coach. They lose their coach in the secondary in Jim Leonard, who gets the defensive coordinator job with the Buffalo Bills. There's been guys leaving for a variety of reasons, and then there's the kind of back and forth that we saw from Sean Payton and Bo Nix. I'll get to that part in 1 second, put a pin in that. Davis Webb plays a big part in this, as he was just 31 years old right now, and I talked to a couple of teams that interviewed him, whether that's Buffalo, whether that's Vegas. They believe he is ready to be a head coach right now, but I was also told it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world if Davis Webb goes back and spends another year with Sean Payton. Well, he does that, and they give him an incentive, and he gets bumped up to the offensive coordinator role that's now vacated after Lombardi was fired. So I would say that Davis Webb, who has a lot of philosophical probably differences than Sean Payton, and I mean that in a good way, that they kind of see things and see the game a little bit differently, that he's going to have a larger voice in the room. Who's going to call plays in Denver? I spoke to some people close to Sean Payton. They're like, I don't see how he would ever give it up, but there are some rumblings that possibly he could give some sort of play calling to Davis Webb, or be, this happens in some buildings where it's, hey, keep an eye out on this, and it's kind of Sean directing where Davis kind of goes with some of the play calling, if that ends up happening. But again, we'll see. Sean Payton's still a very, very good play caller. Now, you also saw in Sean Payton's final press conference at the end of the season say some things about Bo Nix's ankle injury, where he did say this wasn't a matter of if it was going to happen, it was going to be a matter of when, because he's had previous ankles procedures, and this was just something within the ankle that was going to happen. You heard Bo Nix a couple of days later, had his final press conference, and you saw him get maybe a little bit testy in that sense about some of the stuff that Sean Payton revealed. Now, that press conference, to my understanding, and I was told this directly, was not in response and brought in, and Bo Nix asked for it after he heard Sean Payton's comments. He was actually supposed to speak on Monday before Sean Payton, but because of the ankle, because of appointments, because of the scooter, all these different things on locker cleanout day, he was unable to speak on Monday. So he spoke at his first time to be available. Now, it doesn't mean that Bo Nix was not a little bit testy about some of the stuff that Sean Payton revealed. I do believe that's true. Do I think that's a real problem? I don't. What I want you to understand is this is a player trying to make sure that opponents don't know his injury history. He does not want to be labeled injury prone by any stretch after he just played like 60 consecutive games dating back to college. I think something like that. He wants to make sure that those things are cleared up. Those things are very sensitive with a lot of players. Now, where I do think Bo Nix might be incorrect is where he said Sean Payton doesn't know about all of my medical and injury past. That's probably incorrect. The investment that a team makes, picking a quarterback this high in the draft like they did with Bo Nix as a top 15 pick, 12th overall, I believe, they're going to know everything about you. I mean, everything about you, and that includes your medical history. So did Sean Payton probably reveal a little more than he probably should? That's happened with Sean from time to time. I dig when he's super honest, actually, and very transparent in those things. Oftentimes he's not. Other times he is, and this was one of them. And I think the player just kind of took a little bit of offense because injuries are very specific to players, and that's just the way it is. I don't think there's anything awful with the relationship. I don't think there's any thing to look into this by any stretch. I don't think that's kind of a problem by any stretch. And I would also say this. Davis Webb being in the building is kind of that communicator intermediary between these two fiery personalities that I think makes all of this work very, very well with all three of them, to be entirely honest with you. Let's see what else we got here. I haven't really seen... The chat's kind of light today, guys. What's your take on LaFleur hiring? And do you think he can hire the right people to turn the team around? I think the first one that I was looking at in terms of Mike LaFleur getting that job in Arizona is, could he get Gus Bradley to come down there to be the defensive coordinator? Ends up not being able to do that. Bradley goes into Tennessee to be with Robert Saleh, his good friend, and joins that staff. And the part that stands out to me that makes me a little worrisome is like that would have been a great get for Mike LaFleur. Arizona was also offering the opportunity to call defensive plays and more money. And Gus Bradley took the Tennessee job instead. I think that's going to be something that we're going to keep an eye on. I think Mike is a very good coach. What he decides at the quarterback spot is going to be something we're going to keep our eye on. I would say this. It is not a lock for Kyler Murray to be playing elsewhere next season. I would say the chances of him staying in Arizona have maybe slightly increased. I'm not saying he's staying, but my understanding is he might have a greater chance of staying right now than maybe we assumed a month ago, which I think is kind of fascinating. Okay, let's get to the Vikings and their stunning general manager firing of Kwesi Adofo-Mensah. And this was the reason we're talking about this is because it happened so late. Usually teams and ownership go through an evaluation process in the handful of days at the end of the season. Doesn't mean they start doing the evaluation at the end of the season. Actually, the evaluation starts probably prior to that, especially if you don't make the postseason, and then you go through it. But what happened was when the Vikings ownership and the brothers are looking through all of this, and they go through everything that has transpired, and they realize that there's really about 4 draft picks out of the 28 that Adofo-Mensah has made. That's not great. The quarterback situation is not great. My colleague over at The Athletic, Diana Rossini, kind of alluded to in her great article with Alec Lewis over at The Athletic, which really did better reporting on this than anybody out there. And when Diana and I talked about it, she hinted that seeing Sam Darnold in the Super Bowl also played a factor in this because they tried to bring Sam back, and it just didn't work. And so all of that transpiring together with the roster, with some of the dysfunction that has gone on for some time. There were people in that building that thought maybe he was going to lose his job when the season ended. And as this time went on, then they said, I guess he's staying. And then they make the move. And so the timing of it is very fascinating because what's going to happen is they are not going to put a new general manager in place before the draft, before free agency. Rob Brzezinski is going to be the one who handles all of that. He's kind of always handled the cap there for a number of years. He has a lot of trust with ownership, and he's been there for an eternity. So he's going to kind of run things through that process. And then they're going to look to hire a general manager. Timetable, TBD, honestly, on how they're going to go about that entire process. I would say this with candidates. It is probably going to swing back in the opposite direction. When things don't work well, and there was some issues in the building of, this is a guy who came from Wall Street. He's not a football through and through type of bloodline, type of Kubiak Shanahan type of person, maybe, where he's like, it's just in your blood from generation to generation. He kind of thought about things a little bit different. I like when teams go outside the box, but when it doesn't work when they went outside the box, usually they swing back to what they're comfortable with. Look for guys that have good scouting backgrounds, good personnel backgrounds, good leadership within a football building, that type of background. I do think Kwesi was really, really well liked in that building. At least from what I've gathered, this just didn't seem to really work. I know the paternity leave was something that everybody kind of brought up, which I find kind of fascinating, but at the same time, that kind of gets stuck in the craw of football lifers. Is it right? I'm not entirely sure, but it is the way that some of them think. And so that's kind of what ended up happening. So keep an eye on candidates that are not maybe from that analytic Harvard background, like there are several of them across the NFL. Look for guys that probably have more of the scouting, develop players, and film junkie type of guys, and swing back to that. There's one candidate I do want to bring up, and a lot of people have mentioned him, and that is Broncos general manager George Paton, who, remember, spent an eternity in the Vikings building. He was sought after by a number of teams when they had general manager vacancies. He was very patient. He stayed there as an assistant GM for a long time and then takes the Denver job. A lot of people are curious. He has 1 year left on his contract. Would he go back to Minnesota, where he still knows a lot of people in that building? When Kwesi got the job, they still kept a ton of people that were still part of that front office. They kept their jobs and stayed. So there'd be a lot of familiarity there with a lot of people in that building. But I would say this, there is a much better working relationship between Sean Payton and George Paton than probably most people believe. It is outstanding to my understanding. I mean, the working relationship is really, really good. They analyze players the same. They see them the same. They see the game very similarly. And I think they really, really do enjoy working with one another. Greg Penner and Kerry Walton Penner are the ownership group there with the Denver Broncos, the wealthiest group by far in all of football. They can pay George whatever they want to try to go and keep him. But again, we'll see what ends up transpiring because Peyton has 1 more year left on his contract. He checks every box for the Vikings. But again, I do believe the working relationship in Denver is very, very good. But we'll see what ends up happening. That's one name that a lot of people obviously have circled because of his relationship with Kevin O'Connell and other people in that building, and he knows so many people within that front office. Okay, I feel like I'm not getting, guys, I feel like the chats are a little weak today, and I'm not entirely sure why. Let's see. I feel like Munkin was a Haslam-only hire. You said it surprised people in the building. Was this a Haslam hire, organizational agreed hire? Obviously, that question has come up multiple times with the way that the Browns have, done business, whether it was the Deshaun Watson move or whether it was, parting ways with Kevin Stefanski or hiring Todd Monken. I think because everybody kind of believed it was kind of coming down to Jim Schwartz and Nate Scheelhaus. And if you hired somebody else, there was a very good chance you could lose Jim Schwartz. It's not official. He's not at the building yet. He's still under contract. I don't know if they're going to hold him hostage and make him coach. But I think that was always at play because you had such a good defense. I think there's certain people that are scratching their head about it. Do I think the top decision makers are in line on it? Most likely, yes. They're so uncreative. They named themselves after the country. They just got independence from kind of so embarrassing. Okay. New England isn't even a real place. Any trade news? Obviously, we're not in like the trade world right now. Teams have gotten into the draft news. I mentioned this. Obviously, we're going to keep an eye on Tyler. We're going to keep an eye on Tua. I would keep an eye on DJ Moore, possibly. with the young core that they have there in Chicago. That could be something that maybe we keep our little eyeballs on. All right, let's get to this Pro Bowl stuff, and then if you have any other stuff you want to throw out there, I'm definitely here. Here we got Giants OC hire fire. That's what we got from theirs. Any update on Justin Jefferson? I wouldn't look too much into it right now. Any thoughts on Munkin hire and Schwartz update? Schwartz is not officially out of the building. We'll see if something happens to where Todd Monken can try to keep him. Monken, speaking in his introductory press conference today, did not want to get into anything with Jim Schwartz. Actually was very brief when asked about Schwartz and the potential of him staying. He said it'd be inappropriate if he spoke on that. If he does leave, I would keep an eye on Jim Schwartz joining, if Clint Kubiak can pull this off, the Raiders, and be the defense coordinator there opposite of Clint Kubiak. I think that would be a great get for I got to say potential first-time head coach, because we all know that he's getting that Raiders job. Okay, let's go to this Pro Bowl changes looming here, because it seems like it's somewhat on life support. We are going to see for the first time the Pro Bowl games, they're called now, not even be played in a football stadium. They're going to be played at the NFL Experience tonight. They're going to combine everything that they did, from the tug of war stuff that they do and the little game stuff and then the 7-on-7 flag football. All that stuff is going to be on one night, Tuesday night. And I think what we're looking for here is how many people are watching, how many people will watch. The ratings have dropped dramatically each and every year of the last several years, and now it's on a Tuesday night at the NFL Fan Experience in San Francisco. So it's not even in a stadium. I think what the NFL is looking at, my guess is, what are the ratings? Are people interested? They've tried to revamp it a couple of different times to try to create some other interest and some other buzz, because the game became essentially two-hand touch and pads. What has changed dramatically is this. The game used to be in Hawaii, right? The players and their families, it was almost like a reward to go out to Hawaii, get some alone time with other guys in the league, pick each other's brains, spend some time at the resort with your families. Guys love to kind of see, what other guys do in the off season in terms of taking care of their body and their nutrition. And it was always just kind of like, the meeting of the best minds in football, getting a chance to spend some time with one another in a very private setting. Well, now this is the exact opposite. It's Super Bowl week. There's tons of interviews. There's tons of exposure. Obviously, some players love that. Some players don't. And so I do think just the whole thing surrounding the game has changed a lot, and that's why a lot of players have turned it down. Could it eventually get to like the All-Pro situation where you just get names of the Pro Bowlers and that's it, and there's no competition or game? Possibly. The NFL doesn't like to give up on a lot of stuff, but this thing has been headed in a certain direction that we all can see very clearly. And I think this year, after another big change happened, and it's not even in a football stadium, is a year to keep an eye on it. What will Cliff Kingsbury... What's with Kingsbury not having a job? Yeah, he doesn't have a gig right now. There was some thought that potentially he could be landing that Giants job. Nah. There was some talk if Davis Webb got a head coaching job, which again I mentioned, like really impressed in his Bills interview. I think he was down to probably one of the finalists there with the Raiders, even though they were tractor beamed in on Clint Kubiak. But if Clint wanted to go back, maybe he was in play. That, remember, Davis Webb played for him in college at Texas Tech, that he would potentially be the offensive coordinator for Davis if he ended up getting a head coaching job. There are a couple of different, thoughts about where he could potentially land. And right now, I haven't heard a bunch about where he's going to land as an offensive coordinator. And the options right now are obviously very limited in where they're at. Things, remember, mutual parting of the ways, if you want to call it that, with the Commanders as the really, really good first year there with Jaden Daniels and company. And then as the next year went on, just a lot of disagreement in how things are going to be run and how it was going to be run there in Washington. So right now he's a little bit without a chair, if you will, for where it's at. All right, that'll do it because we don't have any other questions. I don't see any other. Wait, oh no, wait. I feel like, oh, I already saw that one. Never mind. Guys, I'm not very happy about this chat, but that's okay. All right, well, appreciate everybody joining me today. And remember, next week we'll be doing this once again, and we will have a Super Bowl champion. We'll be talking Tuesday at 2 o'clock Eastern Time, breaking down maybe what happened in that Super Bowl and moving on into our draft talk. And then we'll start getting into the combine where we're going to be at and what we're going to find out there. And the quarterback at the top of the draft. How is the fit maybe with Fernando Mendoza and Clint Kubiak? Can we break that down next week? I'll have all of that for you on another Insider Notebook here on Bleacher Report. Everybody have a great Tuesday. How about that?